Welcome back to the Film Alchemist podcast, the show where we look at movies we love, break them apart, to find out what gives them their magic. I'm your host, Josh Griffey, joined tonight on a very special double feature by my friend and returning co-host,
Kevin Weinman.
Now, we were debating before, and I don't know if it'll stick, but I think this is good. We're going to call this the Paradopes double feature because I love a good pun. And these two movies certainly have some of the most periscoping I've ever seen in a movie.
Yep.
Like, it's a high amount of periscope usage.
Yeah, usually on a periscope level, the over-under is about 0.5. So these were hitting like 4s.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, this was definitely overarching.
I watched the entire Leprechaun series this month, and I didn't see one goddamn periscope. What a letdown. All right, guys, so as always, if you like the show, and we hope you do, please take a second, leave us a rating and review wherever you find us, especially on the Apple Podcast app. That helps us out a ton with the metrics. We appreciate that. You can find us on all the social media platforms you're on. We're really active on Twitter, at Film Alchemist, #1. So get at us there. Tell us movies you'd like to see covered, people on the show, double features, month-long themes, anything. We want to hear from you. Also, you can now see our faces along with hear our voices on YouTube. Our channel's called Nerd Alchemist. That's plural with an S at the end. So that's enough business. Let's get to what we came here for. Shenanigans at the end of the world, right? That's what these movies made me think about. It's like,
yeah.
So you chose a submarine-themed double feature, right?
Yep.
Would you like to go ahead and talk about what you chose and why you chose it?
A little bit of context. So we're going to be talking about Hunt for Red October. The other part is Crimson Tide. The reason behind both of these movies is because, first off, they're near and dear. I've watched them 1,000 times.
Yeah.
But I think that in the realm of action films, they are their own genre in the fact that it's really interesting to see how a director can make a very contained space really action-packed compared to the fact that it's like when you go to the exterior shot, it's just a tube. And they shoot little tubes at other tubes. Right. And then you got to make that interesting.
Right.
And both of these movies deliver at a high watermark what that feels like and what that looks like. And I feel like it relies more on the acting. Yeah. It relies more on the people that are involved in each one of these scenes. Whereas if you went and watched Die Hard, which is, again, another wonderful near and dear movie to my heart, and a McTiernan film, although Bruce Willis is absolutely incredible, a lot of that movie is amazing just because the action's amazing. Every single one of those scenes is amazing. Well, you don't have the luxury of relying on the fact that a building blows up when you're in a submarine. There's only so many submarines in the world. So anyways, that's a long-winded explanation as to say Red October is going to be the first one that we talk about, and there's a lot to unpack in this movie, and I would like to pride myself on being an expert, so I'm really excited about what we're about to talk about.
Right, and when you told me we're gonna choose Crimson Tide and The Hunt for Red October, I told you this is weird. This never happens to me because I've watched a fuckload of movies in my life. Like I pride myself on how many movies I consume, but I forget. I think it's weird for those of us that watch like a lot of movies. I'm sure you do. Yeah. We all watch way more movies than we think we do. I think is like one of the themes too. But it's weird when you find the blind spot. And I was like, you're the first person ever who's pitched me a double feature on this show. Yeah. And I hadn't seen any of the movies. And I was like, how the fuck have I not seen Crimson Tide? And when I turned it on, I didn't even know Denzel was in it. And Gene Hackman, two of my all-time favorites. I was what happened that movie existed?
And it's a Tony Scott film.
And James Gandolfini, who's like one of my all-time, like, if I could fucking go back and like make someone an immortal, Gandolfini'd be in the running. I love him so much. And I was like, how the fuck did I not know this movie existed? And Hunt for Red October, very much the same. I was like, all right, Sean Connery. Obviously, my favorite movie ever is Highlander, right? Where Sean Connery has a Scottish accent, but he's playing a Spaniard who was living for hundreds of years in Egypt by way of Japan, right? I was like, yep, sure. But he's just like, I'm just going to go Scottish. Mm-hmm. So now you have the Scottish by way of Lithuania, I think, right? Russian evil submaster. And I was like, that sounds great. Like, I'm in.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those, I never watched them. And so I started pondering, it's like, why did I miss these movies? And I think I chalked them up. I'm like, oh, those are movies for like my dad and boring uncles, right? Like they're into that. And I was like, so that's not my shit, right? Like I'm watching horror movies. I'm watching weird stuff, like trying to, watch things that do more work for. So like if I tell someone I watch, like, oh, you're one of those guys. You know what I mean? You've got some clout. Whereas I feel like if you told someone in like 9th grade, like, I like Hunt for Red October, they'd be like, cool, where are your jorts and Reeboks? You know, when are you mowing your lawn this weekend? Right?
Let's be honest, I didn't have a serious relationship till senior year of college.
You're like, stop bringing up the past for me. No, but I equated them to like my dad's movies.
Yeah.
I didn't even know, I watched this movie, I didn't know Jack Ryan was a doctor.
Yeah.
I thought he was like a low-rent Jack Reacher. So I had no idea. I was just like, these were my dad's books and movies, and I never watched them. And to your point, what I do love about these movies is I think the submarine is one of the best settings for a movie, right?
Yeah.
Because as a horror movie guy, right, I equate submarine movies to zombie movies. And everyone knows, right? The zombie scares only get you so far, right? Like, of course we want to see the Savini body get ripped apart. Mm-hmm. Walking Dead, you like that. But the real engine that drives a zombie movie is not the zombie. It's people put in a pressure cooker that start making bad, unethical decisions based on the world we live in now. Right? Because their world has changed, and they got to start making the decisions that we would be uncomfortable with as an audience.
There's an outside
That's
force
what happens in a
bearing
submarine.
down. Yeah, outside
like
force bearing down to make your already intense scenario even more intense.
Yeah, you cannot escape. There's no fucking getting out.
Right.
As a claustrophobic person, I thought, I was like, oh my God. In like Crimson Tide, they're like, we're going to be down for 65 days. I was like, having palpitations. I was like, can you fucking imagine? And so, the first movie we were talking about, Hunt for Red October, I'm interested to see, I'm excited to hear why this movie means so much to you.
Okay.
Because to me, of the two, this one, I know it's considered a slow burn. Mm-hmm. But I finished it, and I was like, this movie definitely could be like an hour shorter. Right? Like, I think like a good hour and a half. But this is the thing, right? With that premise, right? Russian commando steals a submarine, is driving it towards America. Both sides are going to... You imagine the movie you're going to get. And then John McTiernan directing. Sean Connery's the bad guy. You're like, all right, this is going to be like The Rock underwater. And that's not the movie this is. And I think that was part of it for me, is it took me a long time to adjust to what the movie was and not what I thought it was.
So, great point. I think one of the things that's going to be really important for the discussion is just a little bit of backstory about Hunt for October. Is that like this guy? They have the best weapon in the world. This is this is a submarine. The Russians have built a submarine that could effectively end the world.
Absolutely.
And the Mark Aurelius, Sean Connery's character, defects because he. The fact that the entire movie is predicated on his belief is I think that's really exciting, because it's like,
it's unbelievable.
This guy who the Russians have deemed as being the best in their like the best commander,
the villainous schoolmaster,
the
right?
Villainous schoolmaster.
By the way, what a nickname!
Villainous
like, to live your life.
Villainous
If that's your nickname, you have kicked ass in life. Like, that's amazing.
So, but like and by the way, watching this as a kid. To give all your listeners a heads up, I watched this as a kid because my dad and I watched it, and it was like 6th grade, and I just kept watching it, and I thought it was really fun.
It's like I was busy watching Rover Dangerfield. You're like, I'm contemplating the end of the world and geopolitical submarine.
But you're actually right in line with why this movie was almost not made. The reason why it wasn't almost made was because Tom Clancy's novel was actually incredibly in depth, with a lot of jargon, a lot of naval tactics that people wouldn't translate to the screen. So they didn't know how they were going to make this amazing book, but very specific book, into a film. And luckily, after years and years of work of trying to put it together, they get it on the screen. But here's the funny part. By the time that they actually got it on the screen, the Cold War was over. So everyone was really concerned that this wasn't going to have any return, because they were like, we don't care about whether or not Russia does anything. Side note, everyone hates Russia. So you can always put them as, it doesn't matter whether or not the Cold War is, so as long as we're blowing up Russians, we're fine. You don't have to give me a backstory. Like, they made up stuff in Crimson Tide, and we'll get to it, but it's like Hunt for October.
That part made me laugh when Sean Connery kills the KGB guy and his name was Putin. I was like, did they know? Like, what's happening? This movie. But this is what blew me away watching this movie. There are a couple of things that struck me. Because again, I'm of the camp. I was like, if you really pressed me, right? I think Hunt for Red October is a little long. And this is what this movie reminded me of, right? It's like, imagine the world's greatest sausage. And they always say, right, don't see how it's made. And that's what this movie is, right? You're watching it from cow to slaughter to making to putting it in the tube to cook. Like, you see the whole process.
Right.
And I'd imagine for guys that are really into, like, the ins and outs of how this stuff works, that's really fascinating. To me, I kept waiting for, come on. No, okay. But I think by the end of the movie, though, once you settle into it, I think it's actually a really great choice of the movie, right? Because if this movie got super bombastic, right? Like, let's say, like, because I remember pausing, I was like, this movie's 45 minutes in, and this is where I would say the second act starts. Like, the real movie, like, we're chasing and we're defecting, right? You're like, that's a long fucking time to expect an audience to sit for this kind of a movie before it gets going. But why I think that serves the movie well is because it's asking us this one great question, right? The thing that is the most scary about this movie, and what should be building terror inside of your heart, is you're like, holy fuck, man. Some guy can just wake up and one day be like, yeah, I might end the world today. One fucking guy. And they're in a sub, and just the claustrophobia and the solitude of the under the water. I will do what I want. Like, here's a great scene that struck me, right? So there's a scene where he kind of tells the men, right? Like, hey, we're going to go fuck with the Americans, you know, show them that USSR dong. We're going to scare them, right? We're going to get our swag back. And all the guys are like, yeah, and they're fucking singing. You hear the ghostly singing across. Yeah, it's amazing. You're like, that scene is great.
Yeah, right.
You already saw Sean Connery break a fucking fool's neck. You're like, yeah, man, I know what movie this is. And then all of a sudden he comes in. He's like, actually, we're like defecting. And so the crew is not in on this ruse, right? So later, when someone fires a torpedo at them, you see the crew and they're like, wait, what the fuck? Someone fired. And there's this scene where Sean Connery's looking around the room and he just looks at all these like young Russians. And he knows that they know whatever he told them is fucking bullshit. And there's just this energy in that scene of, is one of those guys going to say, get him? And it has so much fucking tension. You feel like your TV's going to explode. And that's what this movie does extremely well.
I really loved the partnership, though, of Sam Neill, because in that moment, he goes, if they were really shooting at us, we'd already be dead. Like,
right?
like, so
Russia doesn't miss, my
Russia,
friends.
yeah. Come on, you know we're good. I think that one of the things I really loved about I actually enjoy the length of the movie, because the issue with doing a Tom Clancy novel is that shortening it in general is always going to be a pain. Patriot Games or Clear and Present Danger, like any of these Jack Ryan things, there's going to be a lot to unpack, so it's very difficult to condense. I think that they did a pretty good job of making sure that the entire audience knew this guy's bad, we're good. Whether or not you completely can unpack the reasons why is really up to you, but like it still delivered for me. I wrote down here that it's so funny that you bring up the music. The score and the music in this movie are so good. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what it is about submarine movies, but we find this out in Crimson Tide too. If you just get a chorus of men singing very like passionately about something, like whether or not it's about the Navy or whether or not it's in Russian, there's something about that's underlying where you're like, ooh, like I'm getting ready to go. And
you know what's funny is that's your reaction. Yeah. My reaction to any time I see large groups in unison is absolute terror. Right? Because my thing is like, fuck, this submarine is full of true believers.
And true terror for a good reason, but it's still great.
Oh, it's no, but it like sends a chill down your spine. And not just because like I'm one of those guys, like I think music is like the darkest magic humans have, right? Where sometimes you can just hear a song and it takes your body over. And I was like, fuck, dude, that's what they write horror movies about. But we'll just go to a bar to like do that. And like none of us act like that's insane. Yep. That when Queen comes on, we'll all fucking start singing. Like we just act like, that's just something that happens at any other time in our life. Like when Bohemian Rhapsody comes on, everyone shuts the fuck down. I was like, dude, that's fucking terrifying. That's what Terminator movies are about. And we're just doing that. But this is the thing. So in Crimson Tide, what I think is really great, right? And like you said, the Tom Clancy-ness of it is, I want you to know chain of commands. I want you to know how what branches they're from.
And I'll go into that in a second.
And there are like all these like, you know, I got to go up north and now I'm meeting two. And it feels like one of the, like a guy who used to be, I still screenwrite, just no one cares. And I used to analyze screenplays as a job, right? And my note, I can already
tell. In the comments section, hit up Josh if you want him to go and do anything with your screen.
You don't. It's
if
fine.
You want notes, he'll help you out. Yeah, let him know.
Yeah, they're probably like, you don't like Red October? Fuck you. I do like it. Chill out.
Yeah.
But here, my theory would be is like, why do we need 6 different naval commanders, right? Shrink that down. We got James Earl Jones, the guy up north, the cowboy on the side, but this is what becomes fascinating. Is again, it's one of those things that all the things that bothered me actually work to kind of fucking jujitsu me by the end of the movie, right. Which is you are sitting here looking at all of these men in powerful posts with enormous amounts of responsibility and people following them. And at the end of that fucking movie, you're down to like 3 guys who can decide the fate of our world, and a bunch of powerful men are sitting there helplessly hoping it works out. And it's so fucking scary. Because this is the thing. Everyone I read online, right? I went on Letterboxd and read a bunch of reviews. Everyone's like, this is a top-notch thriller. And I was like, for about an hour and a half, there's almost nothing thrilling about this movie to me, right? Like, the epitome of it's like, we got to do like a fast trench run, right? And it's like, like you said, they cut to the outside of a tube, and it's like, it looks like I see the women at Walmart going faster on their
through Thor's Peaks, and you're like, oh.
Yeah, you're like, these names are hardcore. There's Rocky stuff. We're going to 28 knots. And they go outside, and you're like, Jesus Christ, like that's how fast I walk my dog. But what becomes fascinating by the end of the movie and where the tension is you're like, it just, the helplessness of us as a species is so on fucking Front Street in this movie. And that's how I just was like, I felt helpless the whole movie.
Well, like one of my favorite parts that they keep cutting back to is when, and I'm not going to name names because I can't forget, I forget who the actors were, but the representative from the United States is talking to the old ambassador for Russia.
Right.
And he's, and every time that they talk, you know, he's spilling lies to him about what's actually happening. And at the end of the movie, he's like, you've lost another submarine,
right?
And he looks down at his hat. And the thing that I think was so interesting about that, like you had mentioned, whenever it pivots out of the submarine moments, you're like, it loses a little bit of tension. Whereas with me,
yeah, a ton.
When it pivoted out, it was a necessity because you see how many levels it affected. Like the guys at the very top are all lying to each other, so that all these different levels are now affected by that, so that now the U.S. has to depend on the cowboy, Alec Baldwin, to do the right thing, to have all of this stuff work out. And it's all predicated on lies and misleading.
Right. It becomes weaponized tedium.
Yeah.
Right? Where at the end of the movie, you're like, we're seeing them like underwater, and you're like, what the But when they cut up, right, the Russian soldiers in the life rafts are like, he's fighting the Americans.
Yep.
And the guy, you know, James Earl Jones and them in the boat, they're like, we can't fucking fire on a Soviet sub. And you're like, that's what becomes so scary is that these guys who we're emotionally invested in, right? Yeah. The guys on that, the Red October, they are but pawns in this fucking enormous thing. And that becomes a scary thing by the end of the movie as a scale, right? Like you said, the politician scenes are great. It's just 2 guys from 2 countries who almost ended the world just getting together to lie to each other's faces, and they know they're doing it.
Yeah.
And what that lets you know when he says you lost another submarine is this shit's going to happen again. Like this is just something that because it feels like this huge thing during the movie, and the ending of the movie is like, yeah, this is going to happen in like 3 months, it feels like we're not going to learn, like, you know, Ramius, right? Like Connery's like, I'm going to go fucking fish on that island. I've escaped, right? Like, welcome to the new world. And you're like, yeah, for you.
Yeah.
But like, I pray to God there are other, like, this is the thing both movies rely on heavily, is that there are soldiers that are not stoked for war.
No, right.
Like there are people that choose war as a career that despise war,
and they're influenced.
And that's what's awesome.
They're influenced by literature.
Yeah,
like Sean Connery. It's like the anniversary of his wife's death.
Yeah,
like these are things that play into the decisions of people that could have nuclear war happen.
Yeah,
and that's so interesting because Alec Baldwin's pulling up stuff where it's like it's a room full of military minds, right? Yeah. When they're all talking about like, what are we going to do about this Marco Ramius guy? And then he's like, this is the anniversary of his wife's death. And they're all like, why do we care?
Yeah.
And he's like, well, I mean, because he's a person and these are things that I think actually matter. Yeah. And they all look at him like he's a kook. This whole movie is kind of based on your gut feelings and just being a person and doing the right thing. I have to tell you, that's one of my favorite lineup of actors in movie history. Everybody in their role fits perfectly.
Okay, now this is where I want to ask you, because I thought Alec Baldwin was shockingly miscast. You know what I mean?
Except for Alec Baldwin.
Yeah, right. I beat you to the punch. But I watched this. I was like, how the fuck did they cast Alec Baldwin?
So let me give you a side story. So Alec Baldwin obviously was in this movie. Alec Baldwin really, really wanted to be in the next. He wanted to be in Patriot Games, and he wanted to be in Clear and Present Danger. And when they found out that they could get Harrison Ford, they shipped him. Which was a brilliant move because Harrison Ford is so much better than Alec Baldwin.
Yeah, by a lot.
but like Courtney B. Vance is one of my favorite characters in this entire thing as Seaman Beaumont, Stellan Skarsgård, right?
Awesome,
so good. Sam Neill. I've never been
Tim Curry. Tim Curry not being the saboteur. I was like, what a great casting. You're immediately like, of course, the spineless Tim Curry.
There's that moment where it's like, this is sabotage. And he's like, sabotage? He's like, Captain. Like, it's like, you're really playing into this. I can't
stay. You're expecting Tim Curry to just break in.
Yeah.
But that's what I mean. What I love about that group, too, is they're like, let's just get guys with, like, really distinct accents that are clearly not Russian.
Not in the
least
bit.
If you have any accent, like, you're in.
Yep.
But that is so brilliant. Because, like, again, they weaponized Tim Curry. So you're like, of course he's not in the meeting. You know? He's Tim Curry. He has to be nefarious. I've seen every Tim Curry movie. Like, I know this is coming. And at the end, he's actually, like, rah-rahing the guys. Like, Ramius is fighting him.
Yeah.
And it's awesome. And even at the end, until Sam Neill gets shot, I was convinced Sam Neill was going to be the saboteur.
No way. Really?
I was fucking convinced because it's one of the...
I'm so interested in this. Really.
You have so much time in that movie, right? Like, to me, my brain is like, there's downtime. I was like, they're setting me up for, like, a fucking big third act, right? So in my mind, I start, like, I'm trying to cheat, right? I'm like, I'll figure this fucking out. And I'm like... And I was like, who would be the most fucking likely to fucking betray him, right?
So
what would be the best?
Did you feel...
Sam Neill was the first one down at the reactor.
Sure.
Like, there was just moments where I was like, oh, this motherfucker.
Did you feel betrayed that it was a goddamn cook?
No, I loved it.
Great.
Because here's what I love, too. Because this is when I was like, oh, fuck, I'm on Sam Neill's ass. Is when he's like, I just want to live in Montana with an overweight wife who makes rabbits and drive a truck. I was like,
all right, I've never been so sad for a guy not to live out his dream of living in Montana, raising rabbits, and marrying a fat American woman.
It's the saddest... I wish I had rabbits dream since I'm Mice and Men.
Dude, right? he looks up and he's like, I would have liked to have lived in Montana.
But this is... That honestly is brilliant because this movie does the one thing I kind of hate in war movies. I hate any movie that kind of propagandizes, right? Where it's like, look at how great America is and it's awesome. We have all these weapons of war and that won't lead to more. You know what I mean? Like, I get it. Patriotism and like support. Their troops are doing their jobs. But like, I just in general hate movies that don't recognize how fucking despicable it is we have war. And this movie has a little of that. And I would say that the Russian, like, second in command, whose biggest dream is to just go have the worst American life, that is a real fuck you to Russia, all right? That is a real shot across the bow, to use nautical terms.
Tom Clancy had a check mark list, and he's like, shittiest state, God, Montana, I guess. Yeah. What's the terrible job? Racing goddamn rabbits? Sure, fucking mark that off. Like,
you know what's weird, though? I'm just about to the age where I was kind of like, wouldn't that be awesome? I was like, not too bad.
We'll raise rabbits and she'll cook them for me. Like, I looked at my dad and I was like, do we eat rabbits?
No, I won't raise anything and kill it, but like I would live in the middle of nowhere and never see another American. Right? Like I think we all hit that age. It's like at 40 where it's like either you're the guy that wants to pre-schedule a hangout at Topgolf once a week, or you want to move to the mountains. Like there's two kinds of us.
I have to bring something up to you because I want to get your feedback on this. All right, so one of my favorite actors of the 70s, 80s, going into the 90s was Scott Glenn.
Yeah.
Scott Glenn, every role that he was in was amazing. I loved him in this movie. Where was his market correction? Scott Glenn, in my opinion, should have been a top 10 actor of that time. But really? I felt, like he's so good in everything that he's in. But I was always wondering what actor was getting Scott Glenn's role during that time where he wasn't getting that major motion picture. Yeah. I don't know. I always felt
who was the actor that snuck in like the cook and fucking torpedoed this man's career. I don't know. I mean, very much like the Cook, right? He's the boogeyman of the USSR, where it's in the USSR, we are all one, but we're also all the enemy then. Like, who did that to Scott Glenn?
I wonder whether or not it would be a Gene Hackman, or it would be a Dustin Hoffman, or it would be, like...
Maybe.
I just feel like Scott does a really great job in this movie. I really like him in this movie, and especially when he does a great job of towing that line of being... frustrated and upset while also being on the side of like what's supposed to be happening is right. Like when he's actually at the periscope and he's like, and he goes, how did you know he's going to turn to starboard? And he's like, I had a 50-50 shot. And he goes, you know what? I might be sending him the whole the codes to the Playboy centerfold or whatever. And I was like, that's such a great way of handling that, because he was so direct about what he wanted as a commander of that submarine. Yeah. But at the same time, he was, buddy enough for me to feel for Scott Glenn. I'm a big Scott fan. That's all I got to say.
Okay, so this is how I try to figure this out, right? I Google actors that look like Scott Glenn. And what I realized is that Scott Glenn didn't hit his fucking stride until he became curmudgeon-y old man. And this happens to a lot of actors. Like, have you seen new Scott Glenn, right? Like, I think of Leftovers and Castle Rock, right? Those are probably the last two things I've seen him in. He's awesome as the, like, man who's seen it all sheriff who's just like, kid, you're fucking soft, man. Like, if this is breaking, you got to get your fucking act together. He's awesome at that role.
Sure. And
when you see him as the cowboy, right, who's running this sub, he has a lot of that attitude, but so fucking stuffed into a suit. The problem is that you can take any guy who looks, he's just one of those guys, like his face demands respect. He looks like every principal. Right. He looks like every boss. So they took him and they said, hey, man, let's just cram Scott Glenn in a suit, military suit, office suit. Like, he was in Silence of the Lambs, all that shit, right?
Right, and that's one of his best roles.
Yeah, let's put him in these roles where he's just telling other people what to do. And you're like, his best role is the guy who's seen it all and is, like, survived. Right? Take him out of the suit and put him in a wife beater. That's where Scott Glenn's power is more palpable. It's my favorite actors, but my dad's favorite actors were Roy Schneider and Scott Glenn. Exactly. And those are literally the same. You just fucking hit it. Roy Schneider is the fucking actor that Scott Glenn could have been.
Yeah.
And you know why? Because they pulled him out and said, hey, man, be a small town sheriff in Amity Island.
Yeah.
That's the role he missed.
Yeah.
He needed a role where he was in the suit, but then, like, Roy Schneider is great in that movie because of all the scenes where he takes the sheriff jacket off and is just a man in awe of nature.
Yeah.
And that's what Scott Glenn was. He has it now. I think everyone now is like, oh, fuck, dude. Like, old man Scott Glenn, right? It's like him and God damn it. Who's the actor from Don't Breathe, VFW, Avatar, right? Like the old military. Stephen Lang, is that it?
Yes,
Lang.
yes, yeah, Lang.
He's the same guy where you're like, how has he not been getting
so
roles,
good in Tombstone,
all the roles forever?
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And you're like, because when he became an old man,
that's when he...
Well, it's some actors, the badassness, like when they hit like the age where they're all gray, but you're still scared of them. You're like, there's a primal genetic thing where we're all afraid of our dads.
Yeah.
On some level, right? We're like, you're like, I could beat my dad's ass like on a scientific, like, tail of the tape. I should be able to beat my dad's ass. Buddy spanked me when I was 5, and I'm still fucking not over it.
But none of those guys had that Leo, Brad Pitt, leading man moxie they were looking for.
That's what I mean, though. The guy who's seen it all and survived is not that. Like, Leo can't play that role when he gets. And I know people are like, he can play anything. No, it's like you were too good looking for too long. You know what I mean? That's not you. Like, there are actors who do that role really well, and it has to be the guy that was character actor when he was young, didn't get the role, and now is an old man. It gives him that extra fucking bite.
Okay.
And I also love Scott. Like, there are just so many, and both of these movies are just littered with those guys, where you're like, how did they just get... There's so many great actors. You're like, how did that guy not have more? I love him.
Both of these movies have people that were front runners in other movies.
Well, like who was the guy
that were side characters?
And I'm so bad at names, I'm ashamed I forget. But the guy who was the commander right before they sent him to get on the fucking ship in the sea, right? He's just this old guy, surly Navy guy. He's the one who's like, hey man, before you bust Jack Ryan's balls, remember he was a Marine. Blah blah blah. That guy who showed him just a little respect. I was like, the fucking gravitas and clout that guy brought.
And
to
how
the screen.
great was that moment too, where he was like,
awesome.
So
Awesome.
the gentleman that you're talking about is Fred Dalton.
Yeah,
Fred Dalton.
And that's what it makes me mad. 'Cause it's like, dude, I do a film podcast.
Fred Dalton, who ran for office.
I fucking forget. But I'm like, he just has that thing.
Oh, he's so good in it, though.
He always ends up in this role, though, where he's like somehow a part of like the chain of we need to tell the audience something.
Yeah.
But he has such fucking gravitas, and he's 1,000,000% believable that he's that guy who's been stationed at the fucking ass end of the earth. And that's what I mean. This movie is littered with those. But let me bring this point up.
Okay.
This movie reminded me of how fucking good Sean Connery is and how often we forget it because of some of his lesser roles, right? League of Extraordinary Gentlemen and the one where, what's her name is like ass-upping, downing under the lasers, whatever. Entrapment.
There's nothing wrong with Entrapment.
No, there's something wrong with it, and it's Sean Connery's performance, right? Everything else, A-okay.
I get it.
But that's what he did, like, even Highlander, you're like, how does Sean Connery end up in Highlander? And I'm beyond happy that he did, right? Like, I pray to the old ones that, like, that role keeps happening for guys. But you're like, how does Sean Connery, right? James Bond, and all these other great roles he's had, how does he... But this is the thing, he was one of those guys that's like, oh, he was James Bond, right? He had a franchise. Oh, he's doing kitschy shit, like Highlander. There's the one where he's wearing like essentially the Borat costume, but red, like the Borat bathing suit, but red. I think it's called Outlander, right? So he has all these weird like genre movies, but when you see him in this, you're like, oh fuck, like Sean Connery can act.
He commands
the
screen.
He literally just walks into a sub, and a lot of Sean Connery's performance in this movie is staring at people until they figure out why they're so dumb they've offended him. And it just reminds you, like, there are just people. And this gets back to your point about Scott Glenn. When you watch Sean Connery, right? And this is like the Rock era Sean Connery when he was having his old man renaissance. You watch that movie and you are just reminded, you're like, some people just have the thing that makes them the main star of a movie.
Yes.
Some people have the movie star thing, right? And Sean Connery is a guy who came up in bodybuilding, got into James Bond, they thought he was attractive. And, he ended up just being this fucking movie star. Like, he's just got that thing that when you watch that screen, you are just totally like, if Sean Connery looked and broke the fourth wall, you'd be like, sorry, sir. Like, that's what he has in this movie. I forgot the era when Sean Connery was just the man.
There's that moment where him and Scott Glenn are arguing about turning into the torpedo.
Yeah.
And the calmness where Sean just turns to him and he's like, and then he goes, what book? And Alec Baldwin's like, what? He's like,
love that.
What book did you write? He's like, oh, about this commander. And he's like, oh, you had that all wrong.
Yeah, such wrong assumptions, right? And then the other guy's like, hey, man, we're about to get blown the
acted
fuck up.
Foolishly. Like, I think because he knew, but that moment was so great because he did a great job of just being so calm. Mm-hmm. While Scott Glenn's like, don't turn that goddamn, so just
he's trying to turn to the right steer. Yeah.
Let me give you a heads up. So, literally, Sean Connery was a last-minute replacement.
Really?
I had to pull this up.
I don't know how you do this movie without Connery.
I had to pull this up just because I forgot the name of the guy. So
that's not a good sign.
I can't stress this enough. The fact that this guy missed out on this role, kind of a nail in the coffin because I don't know who he is. Klaus Maria Brandur. He was an actor in Out of Africa, so he's probably riding the wave of the Oscar win of Out of Africa. And he was an Austrian actor and basically couldn't do it after prior engagements removed him from it. And by the way...
What a fucking... Dude, I'm out. Whatever I'm...
what stupid poster is showing Alec Baldwin and Klaus, like the guy we've never heard of before? Like, Sean Connery nailed it. And I know that sounds like a really dumb thing for me to be excited about, but like I loved this movie because they turned from the subtitle moment in a very fun strategic moment that I don't see very often in movies, which is we keep it subtitled until we have a transitional like speech. And when that one guy is talking about like reading a book and then he uses the word Armageddon, that's literally the last word said in Russian, and then boom, it cuts off and it goes strictly to them speaking in apparently British because they're all British actors. But they
proper English.
But As a kid, I didn't understand what happened, and I looked at my dad. I was like, "What happened?" I was like, "They just want you to stop reading subtitles for like the rest of the movie." And so I was
they
like,
knew American dads were gonna walk the fuck out.
But give me a movie in the last time where they spoke in subtitles to a certain extent and decided in that moment, movie-wise, it would be smarter if we pivoted because it's Sean goddamn Connery that's going to be speaking the rest of this time. So
there has to be some sci-fi movie where it's like, get the communicators. Oh, great. We can all fucking talk in our normal voices.
So I always loved that moment. And I thought that was like a really great moment in the movie where it was like, oh, yeah, you respect the audience you're playing to, where it's like if I read a Tom Clancy novel, Tom wasn't asking me to read in Russian the whole time.
Yeah.
One of the main reasons why and why I think a lot of people would probably have an issue with this movie in terms of the depth of naval knowledge that's in here is because they actually got the thumbs up to go and use all of that, especially after Top Gun. Mm-hmm. So after Top Gun happened, they realized the benefit in utilizing a lot of this stuff. And, and they were like, yeah, sign us up. Like, whatever we can do. So a lot of the filming that you saw was naval, approved shots of a submarine, shots of a battleship. That's not common. It's not commonplace, but they got it. And they were riding the wave of Top Gun at that moment. So I love that there was a depth of knowledge in this because they were almost playing to the fact that they could.
Yeah.
I feel like when we start talking about Crimson Tide, you're going to realize that you love that movie because they couldn't do that.
Right.
Like, they couldn't do any of that stuff that you're talking about.
I told you, I love Crimson Tide because I'm like, that could have just been like a Sorkin or Mamet stage play. And it would be my favorite stage play since Pillow Man. Like, I would love that shit.
Yeah.
Where it's just like, can you just give me two actors on the caliber of Denzel and Gene Hackman talking about like, oh, really? You use wet wipes when you poop? Cool. Oh, well, I use toilet paper because I'm not a hoity-toity Harvard man. And like, they can just, do you know the first toilet paper was made after the tree of the Sumerians? Like, anything like, you know, you could take it as low in the gutter as you want, but those two talking about it would elevate it to a level you're like, that's fucking amazing.
Well, let me put out a bucket list scenario for Griffey. Griffey, I want this to be part of your bucket list. I want you to be able to smoke a cigar on a submarine.
Son of a bitch, dude.
Right before it goes down. Like, I want you to be able to go and see what's happening and then be like, you know what? This is exactly why I joined the Navy. Throw the cigar, and then you walk in and you take the submarine down.
For sure.
So your thoughts on the ability to smoke on a submarine as much as you would like. Okay.
First off, let me take this out of the bucket list because the thought of me ever being in shape, having a haircut, or being in a submarine are impossible. I am a maelstrom of insecurities and problems that would not allow that, right? But that was the thing both movies did, right? Like, when Gene Hackman's having that moment, I was like, fuck. I was like, they are the guys that I assumed my dad was, right? Like, they were mythologized to me, like him and Connery and these guys. When I watched that scene, and, you know, like, Sean Connery has this too, but, like, Hackman is actually doing the stogies. Mm-hmm. There was just such a power to it, right? Like, there's just, like, a manliness to these movies. And I'm not a guy who's often like, oh, that movie's bad. Like, I have friends that are like, I love Fast and the Furious, man. It's like, for men. And I'm like, yeah, for dumb men. Like, not interested. Count me out. But Gene Hackman and fucking Sean Connery, you literally, like, I would follow their command. Right? Like, I'm fucking in. And you know what's so weird? I'll save that for the Crimson Tide because I thought of the weirdest movie connection between those two. But, again, like, just the fact that these movies played on the, here is just a fucking movie star, right? We'll put them in a scenario where there's nothing. Like, you don't have anything. The weird thing they tried to add in this movie, right, was we'll set up a ruse to steal the sub, and there's a saboteur, right? And you're kind of the whole movie like, why the fuck is the saboteur? Like, why didn't he just blow this fucking ship up, I don't know, an hour ago in the movie, right? What is his fucking thing? They pace it out really nice. Like, the Russians still think maybe they'll get it back, whatever. But what happens is you're just sitting there watching Sean Connery not lose his shit, knowing that there's someone on his boat that could blow it up. Mm-hmm. And that just adds to this fucking unshakable feeling that, oh my God, look at the fucking power of this man. Because I told you, I'm claustrophobic as shit. And these movies actually triggered me a little bit.
Did they really?
Yeah, like, one of my favorite horror movies that I can almost never watch is The Descent.
Oh.
Because that movie's all about skinny
that
women
movie's so good.
that spelunk.
Yeah.
And you're like, I'm never descending down into a hole where rocks are at the bottom, right? There's no foam pit or anything. And then when they're like, I think I can make it, and you're like, I'm 4 times the mass of you. Like, there's no fucking way I'm getting through.
Okay.
I can't watch that.
Yeah.
And that is how these movies make me feel.
Got it.
The submarine becomes so fucking scary.
Yeah.
With Sean Connery, you're like, maybe if Sean was around to, like, guide me through and be the steady hand. You're like, it's fucking crazy that no one on that sub defects earlier. It's crazy that they never just beat his ass and, like, take over the sub, right?
Yep.
Like, that's fucking insane.
Yeah.
The moment when they have to be like, hey, let's go propellers live and everyone in the world can hear us, they don't lose their shit. That's a really good screenwriting choice.
I always think that it's really interesting in these movies, too, when all of a sudden they have to go and take a look outside of their submarine to see what's going on. Because I am enthralled. Again, this is why I loved Courtney B. Vance in this movie, because he plays the role of the guy where he's listening.
Oh, God.
He's
the
listening
best
for
character in the movie to me by a mile.
Up here.
Up here. When he was just talking about, like, learning to hear the rhythms of the ocean, I was like, I could watch that shit. Because this is the nice thing about movies like this. If you're going to take your time, which this movie certainly does, let the actors fucking go for it, man. And this is a guy who never really had that shot, who got to go for it. And it was well worth the wait.
Pavarotti was a singer. Paganini was a composer. It's like,
I love that guy, dude.
Whatever. So he's blasting Paganini and coming out of their asses. Like, that entire moment where he's like, if he starts giving you too much grief, ask him about Pavarotti.
Yeah, man.
And you know, Courtney B. Vance in that moment where he's like, and the one way out at Pearl, like I get so immersed in that moment because I used to be, I would talk to my dad, like when my dad and I would talk, I would do that scene verbatim for him.
Yeah,
I loved it.
That's awesome.
I loved it because I thought it was so much fun. Where this guy that's telling another guy, like, dude, take it easy, and this other guy coming in being like, that guy was you, like 4 years ago or whatever. I love that moment, and I guess it stuck with me for a long time. But there's a moment in the movie, and I really ask everybody to watch it. But this was, again, what gets my heart pumping in it, is that they're dead to rights. Stellan Skarsgård has just fired a torpedo at him.
Oh, man.
He removed all of the safety features for that missile to go and hit them, or a missile for the torpedo to hit him. Mm-hmm. And then they're like, we're out of countermeasures. I don't know what we're going to do. I don't know how we're going to pivot. And all of a sudden, Dallas comes in and shifts itself to being the target because they've got all the countermeasures still. Yeah. And then Courtney B. Vance goes, way to go, Dallas. Like, I lost it as a kid. I was like, that's amazing.
Well, Courtney B. Vance's character in this is so fascinating because imagine a guy with that insane amount of skill and, like, maybe 5 people on Earth can appreciate it. And so, like, for him to do that and them to be like, bring it down a notch, we get it. But the scene that struck me was when he goes out to the commander and the commander just hears him out.
Yeah.
And I think that is a really cool scene, especially for that era of movies, right? Where this guy and that's the great thing about the military chain of command is, I'm not a fan of anything that kind of dehumanizes us for, like, the greater being or the whole, right? The whole organism. But in that moment, you see when it's great, which is, are you just good enough? And he just tells me, he's like, hey, man, I don't think this is magma shit. And he's just, the commander's like looking and he's like trying, he's like, dude, you sold me. Like, can you keep doing this? And it's so beautiful the way they make that transition for the rest of the movie.
Right.
I absolutely loved it. And so one of the cool, but I think that's what you're getting at, right? Is that both of these movies really, really benefit from just unbelievable casting directors. Could you imagine either of these movies, right? If 20 minutes in, you're like, man, I fucking hate that actor. like, how do these, like, and this is the thing about Crimson Tide. I actually love Alec Baldwin as an actor.
Yeah, me too.
But I like Glengarry Alec Baldwin. This Alec Baldwin, I was like, he's creepy. He looks like a drug addict. Like, he might shank someone. Like, I didn't understand Baldwin in this movie at all. But every other character's so fucking astounding. You're like, well, they're shuttling Baldwin through, so I can accept it.
The thing that saved Alec is just the writing that Tom had. Like Jack Ryan is such a strong character that you could write anything in anybody. Like, I think of everybody that played Jack Ryan, right? So it starts with Alec Baldwin, and it goes to Harrison Ford, and then it morphs into Ben Affleck for one movie, and then it goes to
what is it? Krasinski now does it?
Actually, let's Chris Pine was Jack Ryan for one movie too.
Was he really?
Mm-hmm.
Fucking hell.
And then it went into John Krasinski. So FYI, I think John Krasinski is a great iteration of it.
Great.
I always have a heart for Harrison. I think Harrison's probably the top.
Well, he's like the guy. He's like on the pantheon of like, man, that guy had a career.
Yeah, bro.
So like, it's gonna be really hard for anyone to supplant Harrison.
Harrison Ford, before he went into a movie, was like, can I make like 3 or 4 of these and do the same guy?
He was like, he was Marvel Universing before Marvel Universe
1,000%. Because he's like, if I gotta learn some sort of stupid dialect, I don't want to go and do that. Like,
the fact that they didn't just like make him Nick Fury or anyone in Marvel is crazy.
Well,
right? You're like, Harrison will show up for a paycheck. Come on.
Harrison absolutely would have. But I think that so. A lot again. I look at the fact that a lot of the different people that were casted were really great. The fact that they went away from Alec was actually really smart.
Yeah.
But like when it comes to Alec in general, he just had to go and play the straight character because all the rest of the characters around him were so strong. There was almost a benefit that he wasn't a strong Jack Ryan because you look at the rest of the movies that come up, like Patriot Games. Jack Ryan has to be the focal point, has to be very dynamic.
Well, he starts becoming Bond-like.
Yes.
And it's not the same. Because what I love, really to summarize this movie to me, what I loved was, so Jack Ryan becomes, like, I was so taken aback that he was just like this goofy doctor who like had a kid and he was afraid of flying. Like all these like little quirks. Because I know Jack Ryan as... I think the first Jack Ryan shit I probably ever saw was Sum of All Fears, right? We're like, oh, he's like a, I remember him as like, oh, it's like American James Bond, right?
Yeah, not a bad movie either.
Fun. Sure. But to watch him, he becomes kind of a perfect POV of the audience where he knows just enough to not get run out of the room.
Right.
But also he's constantly taken aback by the fact that these career professionals are also keeping up with him and the links that they'll go to help him out. And that really strengthens the core of this movie. Because to me, if I had written this movie, right, and I think why it wouldn't have been successful is I would have just made this all Connery. Like, in my mind, like, the easy bad screenwriting decision is like, we're going to go Madman Connery. Because this shit is great. Because it is hard. It's a hard sell in your brain sometimes. But like, so this guy just misses his wife and fishing? Right. So he's going to blow up the world? And then you're like, oh, but he's not. And this is... I think what's really cool is that's in scene, right, with the terrible day for night lighting and like out whatever was going on with Baldwin's hair, where they're just like, "That's where I fished. Hey, maybe that's where I'll fish too." Yeah, right. But what they say to Connery is, "Welcome to this new world." And there's this kind of hopefulness that this movie still embodies, right? Because essentially, this is a movie where a Russian sub, undetected to us, can be stolen by one guy, driven to Washington, and level our capital. We can't do shit to stop him, right? Unless he fucks up. Or a Russian saboteur fucks him up. By the end of the movie, it's just two guys from these two superpowers that want to murder each other talking about fishing.
Yeah.
And so, while I think the movie is telling you with the politicians, like, hey, man, they'll always be doing this shit. I think what it tells you that at a base level, and I think maybe both of these movies are naively optimistic about military commanders that don't ever want wars to happen.
Yeah, correct.
Right? Which, I mean, I think we all wish that our military commanders were like these old wise, like sages, like, well, I would never launch a bullet unless it was the last fucking opportunity.
Correct.
Right? Not necessarily Gene Hackman's take, but like, he's used as a foil for that idea.
Yeah.
But and this is what becomes scary, and I think this is the thing. I initially was hating the movie, but I think by the end it had won me over because I think the layers of bureaucracy are a really nice counter. Crimson Tide is an in-your-face, let two amazing actors scream at you about why this is scary.
Right.
The tedium, the weaponized tedium of Crimson Tide to say, there are 800 layers of people trying to solve this.
Okay.
And at the end of it, it's still just Sean Connery and Alec Baldwin hopefully winning out. Is fucking crazy.
Mm-hmm.
There are staggering implications of this movie beyond the screen. And so I think that slow burn and showing you all these powerful actors that have no ability to save the day is actually a strength of the movie by the end. And so you've seen it more than once. I haven't. I would imagine it's the movie that gets better the more you watch it.
This might be the 40th or 50th time that I've watched this movie.
No shit.
Yeah.
Like, I think I've only seen, like, Halloween that many times, right?
Just to give
and Hellraiser.
Just to give your listeners context, like, for one year of my life, I played football, and I broke every bone in my body, so I stopped. But, like, we had 2-a-day practices, so in the middle of 2-a-days, you have, like, 2 hours to just kill.
Yeah.
And so I would put that movie on right when I got home.
Yeah.
Because it was almost a perfect amount of time before I had to take off.
You're just set.
Can I share a bit of
absolutely
information with
whatever you got, man?
One of the things that I love about this movie was that people that were in the movie actually had military experience. Sean Connery was in the Royal Navy.
Mm-hmm.
Scott Glenn, the guy that we love, U.S. Marine.
That does not surprise me one iota.
James Earl Jones was in the ROTC and did U.S. Ranger training.
Yeah.
So I think part of the reason why this movie resonates with me too is because a lot of the characters were relatively invested in the people that they were actually portraying, because they thought it was important to be able to go and show the character that they probably saw while they were coming up in the military. And they did a great job of kind of making sure that the audience could feel that, right?
For sure.
Like, I don't know why I love this scene so much, but when all of the bigwigs are in that room, and that one guy questions Alec Baldwin about why he feels the same, why he knows all this stuff, and he's like, actually, I met him and I spent time with him. You know, how much time have you spent with him? Love that call out. But there was this moment where everyone's leaving the room except for Alec, because he's been asked to stay. And then James Earl Jones turns to him and he's like, I told you to speak your mind, but Jesus.
Yeah, right. James Earl Jones is so delightfully charismatic.
So delightful.
But I like that scene too, because that's one of the things of the movie where I was like, he's really banking a lot of cred on this one dinner. It was like, imagine all the dinners you've been with anyone. It's like, would you like stake the fate of the entire world on it? For me, no. I'll tell you my scene that I'll walk away. I'll never forget this scene. And I adore it, right?
I'm ready.
Because I was way more into the Russian side of this, right? Connery, Tim Curry, and Sam Neill.
They spent more time there.
Yeah, they're like the hocus pocus witches of like capturing my heart through magic. I love all those actors, right? Love it. So the scene when they have the first meeting with the commanders, and they're just like, hey, man, like, we are defecting.
We're defecting.
And you just watch these guys go through the stages of like, oh, fuck, we should go back. Like, what have we done? Blah, blah, blah. Right. And Sam Neill's trying to, like, defend Connery. Connery's not saying shit. Until at the end when he's just like, hey, man, this is it. And he ends with the line, and he's like, does anyone else want tea? Because the answer's like, he didn't really die slipping on tea, did he? And he just let him know, like, do you want tea? Also, I will fucking smash your throat. But this is what Connery's able to do, is he just fucking eyes people. And then he says the thing he needs to say. And that scene to me was just fucking brilliant, right? Like, for a scene like that, because this is, like, film is a show me, don't tell me medium, right? And a lot of this movie exists purely in a people talking about things that we don't see happening movie. The amount of fucking tension they're able to get because of these amazing actors is actually phenomenal to me.
He, in that moment, told them that he already wrote to Russia that he plans to defect.
Yeah. And so me and my father-in-law are fighting. And you're now in it.
And then one of those guys goes, "You've signed our death warrant." Yeah. And actually, my favorite part was everyone had left, and so it's him and Sam. He's like, "I don't care about the Russians. I know their tactics. I know what they're gonna do."
Yeah.
He's like, it's the Americans I'm concerned about.
Yeah, man.
And I was like,
I know the line. Too.
Oh, so good.
What if we get a Buckaroo? I like the thought that we could all be Buckaroos out here fucking up like Americans.
We're going to need some sort of Buckaroo. And then they cut to Alec Baldwin, which was wonderful.
Yeah, if you get on presidential election Twitter, there's a lot of Buckaroos running around. It's a scary time. But that scene, though, that whole sentiment, right, of Sean Connery, like that carries right through to the end, right? The scene at the end when he's just like, of course I'm going to fucking beat my punk-ass student who only loves himself.
Yep.
Because Connery loves humans and he wants the world to survive. But at the end when Stellan Skarsgård, right? Just another like
you just killed us, you arrogant ass.
Yeah, your arrogance just killed us. You're like, what the fuck? You're like, Connery's dudes would never talk to him like that.
Not in a million years.
And I love movies that take a shot and in one line, right? Like that line and shot, right? Take out the explosion, maybe 10 seconds of the movie.
Yeah.
That tells you so fucking much about the Russian Navy and Sean Connery's character in like 10 seconds, right?
1,000%.
And that's such a small percentage of a 2 hour and 15 to 30 minute movie. But that one little fucking shot, I was like, I know everything now. Like, I totally get it. And yeah, like, I'm with you, right? Like, we don't need the fucking, we're turning and dodging. This is something I learned on this double feature. I didn't know bubbles were like the best defense against torpedoes.
Fire the bubbles.
Release the bubbles, right? Like my kids would never get hit with a torpedo. But like you're like, yeah, it's not exciting. But what is exciting is that there are just these dudes that are so strong in will and personality and they're just fucking stuck. And the fact that we say, hey man, here's the ability to end the world. Be cool. Like, it's fucking crazy. But Sean Connery in this movie portrays the power of, like, I would trust him.
Yeah, right.
Right? Scott Glenn has that power of, like, that's why those motherfuckers exist.
Yep, that's why.
And again, that's why, because Stellan Skarsgård, they always kind of shoot him, like, close up and Raimi angles where he looks like a fucking, and like, he's junkie twitching.
Just chain smoking.
Yeah, man. This movie did have, I was like, the amount of chain smoking on submarines, I don't know that I was okay with. As a guy who occasionally dabbles in, like, cigars or whatever, you're like, I would do anything I could to not lose my shit and axe murder people.
Not a lot of ventilation.
Yeah, right? You're just like, well, fuck everyone else, private. But yeah, I think that's the cool thing is I started the movie being mad that nothing was happening, right? Sure. To me, this was a movie about a madman ending the world. And at the end of the movie, what I thought was cool is that they told us is that any person who loses themselves and loses some kind of value system can be the fucking madman, right?
Okay.
And it's one of the best movies I've seen about using the kind of symbolisms of what the USSR was, right? Forget everything you know. Ignore what's in front of your face and just do what we say.
Right.
And Sean Connery using that against his own troops to do what is right is fucking awesome to watch. But this is what I like is just, it tells us, right? When we are all the same, right? We are all the villain and the hero. And Sean Connery really captures that, man. And I think that's the scary part is that all these big decisions, and at the end of the day, we're all just the guys that want to take a teddy bear home. You know what I mean? We just all don't want to be the guy that fucking has our house explode. Yeah. And I think that really, like, because it's so weird, it just feels like an extra right at the end. Like, oh, he's got a teddy bear, he's going home. But that's the thing that just nails it. And I'm assuming that's what all my uncles love every Tom Clancy movie. Because you're like, we can all relate to that moment, right? We all just want to be the guy that returns home with flowers for our wife and a gift for our kids and just sit on the couch and watch Hunt for Red October.
And I spent like 99% of my entire week in a submarine solving problems.
Yeah, right? We all have our own submarines. Yeah. It's just very few of them will result in the fucking end of the world. So while it is a slow burn, and I understand some of my, like, hesitations, by the end of the movie, it's just, yeah, man, this reminds me of the great quote, right? Is that the world's not going to end with a bang. It'll end with a whimper, right? Like, we're just not even going to see it coming. We're just going to be like, well, I'm at Kroger again. Yeah, this self-checkout's annoying. And then we're all fucking gone. That's probably what'll happen. And that once you start thinking about the movie in those terms, right? This is not a McTiernan Predator. This is not McTiernan Die Hard. This is McTiernan just saying, hey, man, it doesn't have all those same, like, bells and whistles, right? Shouting in your face, but it's the scariest movie I've ever made. And I think I had a much greater appreciation for it as it was wrapping up.
Sure.
Right? And so, yeah, again, when I'm like you and I've seen it more than once, I'm sure I will find more and more things. Because I wonder what I missed in like the first hour of that movie.
Right.
When I was just like, where's the fighting? You know, I was expecting like Air Force One on a Russian sub, and it just didn't get there.
So okay. Let me throw this at you because I know I don't. I could. The unfortunate scenario is I can talk about this movie for hours.
Sure.
But I know that the listeners only have so much time. So if you had the ability to recast this today, who are you choosing?
Ooh,
and I'm not gonna go down the entire list, but who do you have as Sean Connery? Who do you have as Alec Baldwin? I've got mine.
Okay, let me hear yours. I'd like to hear yours. Who do you have as Jack Ryan?
I would love John Hamm.
Yeah, he's a good one.
Yeah,
he's a good one.
Because he's got enough moxie to have a sense of humor, but also be the guy that you take seriously when he goes and tells you something.
Nice. Yeah. See, my first thought, like I leapt at Chris Pine. Be like, he's
but he's already played it.
Yeah, and he's almost like too attractive. Where like Chris Pine never walks into a room and gets like bullied by someone. You know, like does that ever happen to that fucking guy? Nope. No way. You know. Here's a Jack Ryan for you. This is a little out of left field. What if you had Peter Dinklage play Jack Ryan? Like, just think about that for a second, right?
The aesthetics don't fit based on Tom Clancy's novels.
I think it could, though, because Jack Ryan is not a guy who's running around having to beat ass, right? This is the classic I know things and drink wine or whatever.
Sure.
I think Peter Dinklage, and he has that fucking aura of, because imagine the scene, right, when they say Jack Ryan has to give the briefing. And all of a sudden, they're all looking at him like, you're not military. You're just some little fuck, right? You know, you're just some guy. You don't belong here. Peter Dinklage has that, you know, you can judge me based on whatever, but he fucking owns it.
I think
that would be a fascinating casting.
I couldn't agree more, but I also think that, to your point, like, almost every single thing that we've been brought up thinking makes me think that that's a bad decision because I go, oh, well, what does it look like, right?
Yeah.
And who the fuck? If anything, Jack Ryan's a perfect guy.
Perfect.
Because he's
a perfect character for
He's
Dinklage.
not asked to go in and beat people up.
No.
So that's a great call. Okay, so who's Sean?
That is so fucking hard, man.
Do you want me to give you yours?
Yeah, what do you got? Yeah, man.
Christoph Waltz.
Oh my God, that's amazing. You know what's weird about Waltz though is he doesn't have that like fatherly fear, right? That paternal fear factor.
We haven't asked that of him yet.
But
wait,
you
hold
see
on.
Him in Inglourious Bastards, when he's doing his like talking, you're already defeated and you're so scared.
Think about Django. Think about Django Unchained.
I just solved it. Old man Sam Neill. Old man Sam Neill is the perfect guy to cast.
Bring him back up here.
Curmudgeon-y old Sam Neill, right? Like Hunt. We were just talking about Hunt for the Wilder People. That version of Sam Neill.
Love it.
Is fucking perfect for that. Ooh, actually, you know what? Do they have African American Russians?
They do.
I don't. Okay, so
they haven't outlawed them yet. Is he gay? That's the problem.
Lawrence Fishburne.
Lawrence
Fishburne is the kind of guy who could do that kind of role, and I would watch immediately.
But does Lawrence have the ability to have a dialect that actually makes it feel like somebody that isn't American? No. But his dialect is not American.
Yeah, that's true. It's not American feeling.
No, like you have to have somebody.
I bet he does.
You have to have somebody that.
Like imagine this, right? Remember when like Forrest Whitaker, everyone's like, Last King of Scotland, like when Forrest Whitaker came out and he had a completely different voice, and he's kind of done a lot of these movies now. Like he did that in Black Panther. But when Forrest Whitaker came out, that is Last King of Scotland is like the Connery role. Where you're just like, what the fuck? I think Lawrence Fishburne would be awesome to have that moment.
I was thinking about this in R.I.P. Alan Rickman would have been my choice.
Oh my God, he would have been the. Oh, dude, that's so much better. I love Lawrence Fishburne, but I'm one of those guys. You could have cast Alan Rickman in anything, and I would have been. I like he's just one of those guys. Like he just has that everything about that guy. I just fucking Alan Rickman would have been
perfect.
I
know. But I like
that makes me so happy thinking like Dinklage versus Dinklage versus or cooperating with Rickman, right? It's almost like the Potter Snape story. I wish we had. Where they bonded before death, right? Like I would have loved that. That's a good one, dude. That is fucking strong, sir.
That's fun. That's
like that.
really fun.
That's strong.
So just to give you a heads up, there's 1,000 other things I could talk about. My point is, I wanted to...
So wait, let's do this, right?
Okay.
To wrap this up, right? Tell me, if you're pitching to someone else who doesn't have a movie podcast, like, I don't want to watch that boring-ass dad movie.
Yeah.
How would you summarize the joy that this movie gives you? Like, tell me what it is about this movie that fucking kicks the tires and lights the fires for you.
Do you think that person is still listening to this podcast at this point?
Oh, fuck yeah, dude. They can't get enough of the shit I said. No, I'm just kidding.
So for that one, so Eric, I'm just assuming the dude's
random
name is Eric.
guy who's just found submarining.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things that you're gonna absolutely love about this movie is that it combines not only intense thriller action, but it allows you to understand a little bit more about naval specificities and the fact that there's layers of decision making that you have to go through, and there's certain people that are incredibly influential. So you need to be able to go and not only work through those influential people, but you have to be able to go and make smart decisions on your own part to go and make things happen. So let me wrap this up. Watch it because you care about seeing a smart movie that has world-ending consequences that are actually plausible. That kind of stuff it's few and far between, because we see a lot of movies where the world is ending.
Absolutely.
and it's ridiculous. This is straight up a scenario where it's like, I feel like there are a lot of one thing that I know about you is that the movie itself has to have there has to be a lot of them on the line.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a movie, to me, that feels like it's the antithesis of everything's on the line. There's a lot of players to it.
Yeah.
And it helps you understand that there's multiple layers that had to have worked out for this to have worked.
Absolutely.
And so every scene is incredibly important to the end of the film.
Yeah. Mine is twofold, right? Like, my pitch to this would be is that it's shocking how many cogs it takes to make a doomsday clock, right? Like, man, a lot of fucking people have to do, a lot of bad things to get us here. But one guy can press the button that stops it,
Right.
And that's what I like about this movie is that the optimism of, because it's one of those movies that'd be so easy to just make a cynical action thriller.
Right.
But so many people in this movie have to extend an olive branch of decency and fucking trust that someone else is also trying to do their best.
Yeah.
There's way more optimism in this movie than I thought. In a movie about this all too realistic and terrifying scenario, that really warmed my heart, man. Like, it's nice to think that there are just people out there that will do the right thing and not be overwhelmed by the moment. So that's what I would take away. Just like, man, I'm glad that exists, because I don't know that many of us have it. You know what I mean? So that's it, guys. That's The Hunt for Red October. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as we did. Stay tuned. We'll be back immediately with Crimson Tide. This is just Denzel Washington getting handed the keys to a naval ship of Hollywood stardom by Gene Hackman. And it is fucking awesome. As always, if you like the show, please leave us a rating and review wherever you find us, especially on Apple Podcast app. That helps us a ton. You can find us on any social media you're on, and follow us on our YouTube channel, Nerd Alchemist. That's plural with an S at the end. We'll be back in a minute. Thank you very much, Kevin, for joining me.
It was my pleasure. And please, for God's sakes, talk to your fathers about Hunt for October and grow your relationship with them.
They'll never be happier than if you gave them like Reeboks for Christmas.
I love Hunt for October, Tom Clancy, and New Balance. Can we go and get a beer together?
You're the best son. You're the best son.